I realized at one point in my early 30s that I was not well. And that I was not well with all these meds, over the counters mostly, but certainly prescriptions as well, and including birth control pills too. So that was a prescription. And so I decided that if I'm not well with all the drugs and my husband's colleagues and our friends couldn't help me, then I'm going to just stop the drugs. I'm just stop everything. I'm just going to clean, pure, done, finished, nothing but was going to go into my mouth but food. Now, I am not suggesting that people do that because everyone is different and it really does make a difference. But I felt as though I was at least well enough. I had enough robustness to be able to push through something that might be problematic if I didn't take this or that med. And I was able to do it. And it made a significant, not gargantuan, but enough of a shift that I started to really pay attention. Oh my gosh, I think what I was living was side effects. Side effects from the sinus drugs, side effects from the headache drugs, side effects from the acid problems in my stomach, and that's what I concluded. Now, I didn't really have anything to go by other than my own experience, which was pretty powerful. So I stuck with it, and so I was looking for something to replace it. And the first place I went to was a health food store. And in health food stores, especially back then, we're talking about the 80s, early 80s, 81, they were encouraging soy products, and which, we've come full circle around that. And lots of supplements and vitamins. And subsequently, many years later, I've learned that most of those are synthetic. Now, the supplement depends on what you mean by supplement. A supplement can mean cod liver oil, but it can also mean synthetic vitamin D, for example. So I started on that journey, and I started to follow taking supplements and vitamins and reading, and that wasn't quite doing it either. I was taking a handful. I used to carry Ziploc baggies full of supplements and vitamins, and I would muscle them down before my meal and then during the meal, because some were taken before the meal, some were taken during the meal, some were taken after some were taken before bed. And I was spending hundreds of dollars per month on these medicaments. So I stopped that too. So I needed to go to the next step. And my next step was now I remarried. My new husband and I moved to the country outside of Buffalo, New York. And we had 15 acres, and I started to wildcraft herbs. It felt like a cadence. I was able to make my own medicines of sorts, not all of them, but a number of them. St. John's wort, horsetail. There were a number of them, and it was really a joy. And that's what brought me into homeopathy. However, I also have to say I went to a homeopath who just around that time said, you need a specific homeopathic medicine to kind of uproot all of the damage that's been done by the meds. And probably the way I was eating too. Now, I was never a fast food eater. I always loved making food from scratch. I always enjoyed making and learning how to make indigenous foods from all over the world. So it wasn't that bad, but nonetheless, it still wasn't quite right. So she gave me a remedy when I met with her. It was called Nux vomica. It was a 200C that's the potency. And at the time, I was fatigued and had asthma on my sinuses. I was still not right. And within about 2 or 3 days, about 50% of my suffering just melted away. And it was only 2 doses, as I recall. And I said, what was that? Are you kidding me? This was amazing. And so I said, I have to learn about this. So I went to a lecture shortly after that was given by a medical doctor who was retired, but he had become a homeopathic physician after being trained and being in practice for many years. He switched gears and studied and then practiced homeopathy exclusively. And I went to his lecture, and that's what really turned my head around. I bought a simple book. I bought some homeopathic medicines in a kit. At that time, there were just 29 little remedies in a kit. And I brought them home, and I said, I am beyond curious about this. I'm driven. I have to find out more. Now, at the time, I was feeling much better. My parents, I'm very close. I was very close to my parents. My father was having cardiac conditions. He had already had cardiac arrest, I believe, twice by that time. My husband was in good health, but I knew that if I was going to have children, I really wanted to embrace this fully, and I wanted full control. That's what I felt I had lost. I'd lost control. Was taking medicament substances that were, the side effects were listed, but do you think I ever opened up that little pamphlet and read all of them and gotten a magnifying glass out and read all those side effects? There would be no way, because I believed, I trusted, I thought that it was all that I was protected by, I don't know, the government, I don't know, by the industry. I don't know. I just felt protected.
But people don't realize, not to interrupt, but the supplement industry isn't regulated by the government. So people don't realize that when they go in to buy a quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, a medicine, a supplement, in that whole supplement aisle in your drugstore, there is no FDA regulation on those bottles.
Well, that's true. But what's probably even worse than that is that the medications that are actually made by the pharmaceutical industry are regulated by the FDA and have terrible side effects. And
Right.
then they're often yanked from the market a few years later after enough people have been damaged.
Right.
So it's a double whammy. You're absolutely right, Jamie. It's a double whammy there.
Yeah. So yeah, fascinating. First of all, fascinating. Can you explain to me what the Nux vomica, what is that? So, and tell me about that.
Homeopathy is made from plants and animal substances. Often, it's usually one medicine generally, or one product, I should say, and it's diluted so that any toxicity that may be naturally found in the original substance is diluted so far that it can no longer be of a problem, and instead it brings forth the curative action. So Nux vomica is a type of, it's sometimes called poison nut. So it's diluted 200 times because, as I said, I used Nux vomica 200C. And so it was diluted 200 times. C stands for to the 100th power. Highly, highly diluted. So what it means, in essence, is that everything on this earth, toxic or otherwise, can be made into a homeopathic medicine if diluted properly and potentized, made specifically by a homeopathic pharmacy. And so that the symptoms that Nux vomica would cause if someone were to eat it are now relieved by diluting it and potentizing it, and then administering it to the person who's suffering from those symptoms. So it's like cures like.
So interesting. So does it compel your body to jump into action and do something, or is it the actual medication that does it?
I think that do we know exactly all of the functions and how it acts? What it does is, to put it simply, is that it simply stimulates the body's natural ability to bring itself back to homeostasis.
Wonderful.
So if I had done nothing, Jamie, if I had simply stopped all the drugs, and I had not had so many of them, but even if I had simply stopped them, over time, my body would have found homeostasis, most likely. And that would have given me the life that I was looking for, which was more energy, back to my original energy, and my clarity, and that dropped a lot of the allergies, etc. But we get stuck. And also, we've been so medicated and so tinkered with that there's more to be done for most of us than just wait it out and eating good quality foods.
So now you've gone to the one homeopath, you've gone to the lecture, and you're starting to study. I understood that your studies took you to Calcutta. I would love to hear a little about that journey. And so keep in mind also, for this podcast, I love to really double click on stories because it's a storytelling podcast. So really tell me, I want to know what Calcutta looked like, sounded like, give it to me.
You are a raconteur, Jamie. You do it so well, and you draw it out in everyone else. I completely appreciate that in you. So yes, I will do what I can to describe Calcutta. Now, here's the thing. I was in practice for many years. I was teaching homeopathy. I was teaching it on college level in New York State. I taught the first homeopathic course in New York State that was credited by the state at a college level. I had been using practicing, teaching homeopathy for almost 2 decades by the time I found these doctors in Calcutta. And so, Calcutta. Well, you leave the plane when you enter Calcutta, and the first thing you notice is the poverty and the suffering. And old women would come up to us in a sari, pointing to their open mouths, begging for food. Children were being held by other children. In other words, a 2-year-old was held by, say, what looked like her older sister, pointing to the child's mouth. Hunger. The infrastructure and the outside, the city of Calcutta is in tremendous need of repair. Now, I spent a lot of time in a lot of the doctors' homes and in the facility that I worked in for those years, and they were immaculate and clean and organized and lovely. But the city, the streets, they were really not sidewalks. You could barely walk. There was a human feces on the streets. There were mothers with their children living on the streets, and their only protection was a piece of plastic that they had rummaged from a garbage pile and kind of tied it around a tree and then put a stick over, affixed a stick to it so that they had a little protection during the monsoon season. It was extreme. I had never seen anything like that. And I've been to the Caribbean and seen a couple of Caribbean islands, but this was in such large scale that it was overwhelming. The smells, everything were so different. So I was invited to work at the Prasanta Banerjee Homeopathic Research Foundation in Calcutta. And so I sat next to these great doctors. And what I mean by great, these are doctors whose parents and grandparents, etc., had also been homeopaths. Now, they use homeopathy exclusively, even though they're medical doctors. And that's not uncommon in India to find that. They go to medical school. They might even go to England to go to medical school, or they go to medical school in India, and then they concentrate using homeopathy exclusively. And so I sat by these doctors, especially Dr. Prateep Banerjee. He has subsequently passed away, as his father, Dr. Prasanta Banerjee, both of whom I sat side by side. I did it the first time I was there for 13 weeks, and it was an experience of a lifetime. I observed and recorded every single case that came in. But what was particularly interesting is that each doctor, and there were 12 total, so that was the doctor I was working with, plus in the other chambers there were 11 other doctors. Each one of them was seeing 100 patients per day. And that is, it's hard to fathom when you live in the US, when you're thinking about a doctor working in a practice. But people were lined up outside of the clinic, and they would come sometimes 2 days in advance or a day in advance, and they would just camp out on the streets of Calcutta, waiting for their turn to see one of these doctors who was using homeopathy exclusively.